Welcome. I'm Eric Fleming, host of A Moment with Eric Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Eric Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenteric.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoy this episode as well. Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Eric Fleming. I am your host, Eric Fleming. And this podcast is very, very satisfying to me, and I hope that is edifying and entertaining to you as a listening audience, but it's very satisfying to me because two of the guests that are going to be on are people that I've been trying to get on for over a year. And due to scheduling conflicts or whatever, just wasn't able to pull it off. But not only did I get one of them, I got both of them. Plus, thanks to my good friend A.O. Sakai over at Universal Right Publications, we have a third guest who follows in the tradition of guests that I've been bringing on who have been working in the vineyard for a very, very long time, who have been doing the work in the community and may not get all the national recognition that some people get. But nevertheless, the work they're doing is important. So I hope that you can, as an audience, appreciate the guests that are going to be on today. But before we get into all of that, it is time for a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. The UN Security Council adopted an immediate ceasefire resolution between Israel and Hamas, with the U.S. abstaining from the vote to allow passage. A large container ship hit a bridge in Baltimore, causing part of it to collapse into the Patapsco River. 6 road construction workers died, and 2 workers were rescued. Donald Trump won a legal bid to pause a $454 million civil fraud judgment against him by posting a $175 million bond preventing asset seizure. Meanwhile, his criminal trial related to hush money payments to an adult entertainment star will begin on April 15th. The U.S. Congress passed a $1.2 trillion budget bill, avoiding a partial government shutdown. Representative Mike Gallagher announced his resignation from Congress effective April 19th. Further narrowing the Republicans' majority in the House. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski expressed that she cannot support Donald Trump as the party's nominee for the 2024 presidential election. A Georgia judge allowed Donald Trump and 8 co-defendants to appeal a ruling that kept lead prosecutor Fani Willis on their criminal election subversion case. In Mississippi, 6 former law enforcement officers received sentences of 10 to 40 years in prison after pleading guilty to the torture and sexual abuse of 2 black men. No criminal charges will be filed in the death of non-binary Oklahoma teenager Nex Benedict, who died by suicide after a school fight. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed a law banning diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in public schools. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a law banning children under 14 from social media, and Tennessee Governor Bill Lee signed the Elvis Act into law, protecting artists from unauthorized use of their likeness by artificial intelligence. The CDC issued a health advisory urging vaccination after 62 measles cases were reported in the U.S. And Former U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman died at the age of 82. I am Grace G., and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it is time for our first guest. Ekemini Uwan is a public theologian, an international human rights activist, and co-author of the 2023 NAACP Image Award nominated book, Truth's Table, Black Women's Musings on Life, Love, and Liberation. She co-hosts the award-winning podcast Truth's Table and Get in the Word with Truth's Table. Uwan is a 2022 Aspen Ideas Festival Fellow and a 2023 Special Advisor for the Aspen Institute's Racial Justice and Religion Collective. In addition to being an NAACP Image Award nominated author for outstanding literary work, Ekemini is also a contributing writer for Hallmark Mahogany and a charter member of the International Civil Working Group of the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent at the United Nations. Her writings have been published in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The Huffington Post Black Voices, and Christianity Today, to name a few. Ekemini, has appeared on MSNBC, The Griot, and her insights are quoted by NPR, CNN, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and The New Yorker, among other publications. As one who is passionate about theology, Ekemini has a fierce commitment to the gospel and its implications for issues pertaining to reparations, racial injustice, anti-Black racism, and white supremacy. Ekemini believes that theology can and does speak to our present day's culture, social and political issues. As a result, she often speaks, opines, and writes about the aforementioned for various online publications. Ekemini's voice has been sampled on Lecrae's album, All Things Work Together, and Sho Baraka's The Narrative. She enjoys spending quality time with loved ones and working out in her spare time. As a self-proclaimed part-time fashionista, she has a penchant for thrift shopping. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Ekemini Uwan. All right, Ekemini Uwan. How you doing, sister? You doing good?
I'm good. Glad to be with you, Eric. Thank you for having me.
I am so glad to have you, sister. I tried to catch you last year when everything was going really, really awesome for you with the book and the nomination at the NAACP Image Awards and all that. And you were like, Eric, I'm too busy. I got too much stuff going on. So
that's right. That's right. It was about this time last year. We had the Image Awards, so it was just getting hectic.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad I was able to get you because you've been a warrior out here. And, and thanks to LinkedIn and some other platforms, you're starting to get your shine a little bit. The United Nations knows you really well, but maybe not the general public. So I wanted to kind of get you on.
Thank you.
So one of the things I do with guests is that I start off with a quote.
Okay.
And it's something either maybe that you said, something that you may have written, or something related to the work. So your quote is, "Truth-telling is an act of love, and love is an act of spiritual warfare in a world built on lies and the express hatred of Black lives." What does that quote mean to you?
Yeah, so I believe that quote, if I remember correctly, comes from the book I co-authored, Truth's Table, Black Women's Musings on Life, Love, and Liberation. And I think it was from the Decolonizing Discipleship chapter. So that would be chapter, I don't know, maybe my third chapter, somewhere around there. In the book, I wrote 4 of them, and so, and so I think that in a lot of ways, this America is addicted to myths. and addicted to formulating myths. And as of late, really entangled in a lot of propaganda. And so instead of embracing truth and seeing it, as a form of love, they would rather devise lies. They would rather devise myths that are based on lies. A history that is historical, um, that is rooted in um, a hatred that I don't think people wouldn't want to say it that way, but that's true because these lies are what keep the mechanisms of oppression going and the wheels of injustice turning over the backs of Black lives, brown lives, indigenous, lives, because you have to, because if you tell the truth, then you have to acknowledge our humanity. And if you tell the truth, then that means you have to do right by us. There's a responsibility there, and people would rather. Lauryn Hill said this many years ago. The rapper, well, rapper, singer, artist, let's say. Lauryn Hill said many years ago that people prefer fantasy, but what they really need is reality. And so, time and time again, when they're given the choice of fantasy or reality, they would rather choose reality and, I'm sorry, choose fantasy and create fantasies. And the way they do that is through myths and lies. Um, so, yeah, truth telling is key. It's key to my work. It's key. I think that's the way that we will get free by telling the truth to ourselves and to one another.
So you describe yourself as an anti-racist public theologian. What drove or compelled you to be a theologian, and why do you do work that, in your words, puts your life on the line by making people look in the mirror and face the racist reflection staring back at them?
Yeah, so yeah, well, I didn't choose this life, it chose me. I didn't set out to be, public theologian. I didn't even know what that was, I just felt like I was just following God's call on my life, which, I was in corporate America before I started doing my work as a public theologian and lost my job. They got rid of my whole sales team the day before my birthday, which it was a very traumatic way. It was just, yeah, a very traumatic, departure. If anybody's ever lost a job suddenly and got a pink slip or got laid off, how traumatic that can be. And I was doing well financially in corporate America, living in California, which is where I'm from originally. And yeah, I just sensed that the Lord was wanting me to do ministry, but I was a little baffled at first because I was already very much involved in my local church at that point. And so I was like, well, what else am I supposed to do beyond that? And just through prayer, I just felt like Lord was leading me to go to seminary, but I didn't know why, because I didn't feel like I was called to be a pastor. I didn't feel like this burning to preach the word in the traditional ways that we understand it. So I was like, okay, I'll just go. I'm gonna just follow and what I feel the Lord is leading me to do. And so I went to seminary, and when I went to seminary, Michael Brown was lynched in Ferguson, and that really, and that really was the precipice. I'm sorry, that's really the precedent that really got the Black Lives Matter movement going in the ways in which we had experienced it under Obama, at that time. And so while there at that seminary, I was unfortunately experienced a lot of racial trauma being the only Black woman in my MDiv program during the lessons on Facebook. So, it's like I'm sitting in class with you and then I see what you're posting on Facebook. Like, this is really what you think of us. Like, you don't think we're human, or you don't think we're human in the same way you are human, white man or white woman. And so that was just wild to me. And so I really just started getting into that work because I was fighting the white supremacist powers that be at my own institution. And then people will call me, to come and speak or to write an article. And that's how my foray into public theology started. And so, yeah, it was by force, in that case.
Yeah. Um, what progress do you see towards us becoming a nation free of white supremacy? Or do you see any progress at all?
I don't see progress. No, I see I see fascism, I see white supremacy, recalcitrance, on white supremacy and race, especially post George Floyd. I yeah, I mean with the evisceration of DEI, jobs and programs and however you feel about DEI, right? There's people to the left that are like, it doesn't do much. There's people to the right that think it's so radical, right? So wherever you land, that being that those programs and those jobs, being eliminated in the way that they are, is an indication that we are absolutely not progressing. Book bans, right? Our history or our Black history being erased and being prohibited from being taught, not being able to teach slavery, the real truth about slavery in schools is yeah, it's a regression. So unfortunately, I don't see a progression. I wish I did, but I don't. And it's sad. It really is.
So, how hard does that make your work?
Well, honestly, I think even in the last years, probably even when I last described myself as an anti-racist public theologian, I am an anti-racist, I always have been. But honestly, I see my work much more, how can I say, much more centered in the ideology of Pan-Africanism. So I don't even really uh, which is subversive, of course, to racism and white supremacy, absolutely. But I don't see myself necessarily going toe to toe in racist white spaces, right? To go and uphold the dignity and humanity of Black people. I did do that for a time, but now I see my work to be much more generative when I'm from a Pan-Africanist lens, so it is difficult work for sure, right? Because we're still trying to do a lot of work to get the equity, to get the rights, to get the reparations, to get all the things, that are owed to us. But I'm doing it from a different frame in which I'm not trying to teach or really convince, white people per se, in a very explicit way. It's a little bit more subversive now that I'm working from I'm more of a Pan-Africanist frame, especially with regard to work on reparations and the work that I do at UN and within the International Civil Society Working Group that I'm a part of.
So you basically saying you don't go into the lion's den too much anymore.
Not really, yeah. It's shifted. And you know what? The pandemic shifted it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pandemic shifted it because there were times where, I'm sorry, pre-pandemic, where there were a lot of conferences and things about race, racial reconciliation, all these things. But those conferences are, they're almost non-existent, it seems. Or maybe I'm just not in that world anymore, so I'm not aware. But it doesn't seem like those conferences are happening like that in that same frequency, 17 and 18. And into 19, so that's changed too, but also, my work has just shifted. I just think it's more generative for me to work toward building something. And in building something, you inadvertently have to tear down, but I think I found it to be more generative, to be building something instead of just trying to explicitly go and tear this down. And I'm glad I shifted because people, because this was before George Floyd that I was doing like some very concrete anti-racism work. And then post George Floyd, people have doubled down on their racism, right? There was this very small window where, people seemed to, they showed a brief enlightenment, but we know it turned out to be, false, in that respect. And so, so I'm grateful for the shift. Honestly, I'm grateful for the shift. And
So how has the concept of Godward hierarchy defined your work?
yeah. So in the book I talk about, thanks for reading the book. How about that? Um, well, I think step one, okay, thank you for reading the book. I think that it is antithetical, and I think that it is a complete reversal of the harm that racial stratification does and white supremacy does, right? Because um, in that wicked ideology, it holds, right, that white people, are more superior, and that they themselves are the standard over against, black people, brown people, everybody that's not white, right? But there's levels to this, right? And so with black and indigenous people, being on the bottom, and so a Godward hierarchy seeks to honor the intrinsic dignity and worth that each human being has. And so we look to God, who created all of us in God's image, so that we might honor the dignity and worth of each other, so that we can really see one another, love our neighbors as ourselves, right? Because we really can't love our neighbors without loving ourselves. And so the Godward hierarchy helps us to resist the temptation to lord our power over others, to oppress other people, to restrict their agency, to use people as a means of gain, instead of seeing them for the amazing and multifaceted, multidimensional human beings that they were created to be, with purpose and with intention, by God. And so it helps to lift our gaze away, and I think it helps to counter and combat, white supremacy.
Yeah, because one of the things I liked the way that you explained it in simple terms was that God gave us dominion over everything but each other.
That's right. That's right.
And
we're not meant to rule over each other. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so if we're supposed to be living these lives that are supposed to be godly, the last thing we should be doing is subjugating other human beings.
That's right.
Right. Explain the concept of decolonized discipleship.
Yeah. So, that book was, that chapter was written because, initially, I think I even explained it in the book, actually. I was asked to write an article for this publication, and I wrote it, and the little blog article I wrote was Decolonized Discipleship. And it was a white evangelical, magazine, and I was really coming, for the white capitalistic Jesus, that they so often laud and worship and describe, knowingly or unknowingly. And so they didn't want to run the article. And I was like, okay. I got a call, and they didn't want to run the article because there were actually quite a lot of Black Christians in that space, in that particular organization. And so for me, when I was doing that type of spot, on the nose, anti-racism work, I was always going into those spaces and writing into those spaces in order for the uplift and edification of Black people. And yet, in turn, that would still edify and help to reshape, and convict, the racist white people in those spaces too, right? So it was really a double-edged sword in that, or two for one, if you want to think about it in that way, but that was always my purpose, was to help to wake it up, as the kids say, wake up the white supremacy and help, the Black folks, see that, and to be able to know, like, hey, don't let these people colonize you. Like, there's nothing wrong, with your hair. There's nothing wrong with the way that you emote during worship. There's nothing wrong with your figure. Like, like, these are not, like, God has said it's good. God made us, good. God made us good. And so I find that that's an issue with colonized discipleship, right? They'll try to have Black people in those spaces assimilate toward white white norms and white ideals. And so decolonized discipleship is trying to show Black people and people of color, whoever picks up the book, that who you are and who God had made you to be in and of itself in your personhood is good. It is, it's the, and helping them to discern, like, no, what is actually the sinful part here that needs to, that we need to rid ourselves from, and what is the good that we need to retain? The good has nothing to do with the good is your hair, the good is your nose, the good is your melanin. The sin is the way in which we seek to harm one another. The sin is where we try to oppress one another, right? The sin is where we slander and harm each other or hit, whatever you want to, the list goes on and on, right? And so that's the reason why I wrote that. That is what I mean by decolonized discipleship. So really helping people to disentangle white supremacy and the white supremacist additives that are placed on the gospel in those white conservative spaces so that they can truly see the brown-skinned Jewish Palestinian God-man, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I thought about, when I read that, I thought about my church. So I grew up Lutheran.
Oh, I did too.
Yeah, I was a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Me too.
Okay. And so,
wow.
in our church, we had a gospel choir, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because we had a gospel choir, we made the front page of the magazine because that was like something,
very rare,
unheard of, right? And then they found out that the other Black Lutheran churches in Chicago also had gospel choirs because we would have concerts together at each other's churches.
Yes.
And, but one of the things they were trying to highlight was, the mission work, right? That, for Lutherans to reach out to Black folks, this is part of the experience as far as the testimonies and the response and call and all that kind of stuff.
Call and response. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, I just thought about that, and I was like, here I am, high school kid, and we shaking up the whole church, Yeah. And then I ended up being
and that shouldn't be shaken. That should just be celebrated, and I think that's beautiful. It should be celebrated, but oftentimes it's not, right?
Yeah, they treated us like a celebration. I mean, to put us on the cover of the magazine and stuff and highlight it. It was like, they were on the cover. We're in our choir robes, marching down the middle of the church. You know what I'm saying? So, in the book of Isaiah, it challenges us to be repairers of the breach. How can reparations in America repair the generational breach created by white supremacy? And what does reparations look like to you?
Yeah. So, I see the issue of reparations firstly as a spiritual matter because there was a violation. In order for slavery to take place, in order for you to rip Africans away from their land and from their people, in order to beat human beings, as if they are chattel, just like they're chattel, treat them even worse than chattel, you have to dehumanize them. You have to see them as less than. You have to diminish their worth, which is a violation, of the image of God within, fellow human beings. And so I see it as a spiritual violation. And so I believe that that reparations, and the way I see it, and I'm advocating for global and federal reparations because I'm grateful and I'm heartened by the local movements. I'm grateful for the work that my comrades are doing. But oftentimes when it comes down to it, they end up, because of the bureaucracy and the politics here in America, and the fact that because America is so racist, this country will seldom or rarely ever approve a policy that will only benefit, that will only remediate, and benefit Black people. That's why we don't have full-on student loan debt cancellation yet. That's why we still don't have Medicare for all. That is why affirmative action has been taken away. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? And so for me, I see reparations, I believe it has to be a global, and there's a movement toward that, global and federal, in order to really remedy the harm done, to our people on the continent and in the diaspora comprehensively, right? You can only do so much on this side too. So you can never really compensate for that harm. But to me, within that reparations package, it would be land, it would be free education, it would be free therapy, trauma therapy to address generational trauma. It would be the options of repatriation, if African diasporans want to go back, and we are all Africans in my framework and estimation, if they want to go back, it would be all of that and a check, of course. So that goes without saying. But yeah, and so much more, that's involved in that. But that would absolutely global and federal level type of reparations package. I think we would need, right? And so yeah, the movement has been encouraging, but has been discouraging, because when it comes down to it, it's not quite materializing in the ways that it's been announced, and pronounced, if that makes sense, so yeah, that's the way I see it, and that's what I push for.
Yeah. You struggled, like many of us, during the pandemic. Since then, you have written a best-selling, award-nominated book, and you co-host an award-winning podcast. Shout out to your partner, Dr. Christina Edmondson. What message of affirmation and encouragement would you like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would just say that if you have clarity and you're really clear on what you feel that your purpose is and what you're meant to do here, I say go forward. Go forward and do it. Do it. Use wisdom, of course. If you need to keep your full-time job and work on your passion and purpose on the side, then do that. And I think, at least for me, being a woman of faith, my thing is always the need to pray, right? And the need to seek discernment, get discernment and wisdom, from God and on what to do. And if you don't know your purpose, absolutely pray. I didn't always know my purpose. When I went to seminary, I didn't know why I was going, but I was very clear that the Lord wanted me to go. But I didn't know why I was going, because I was like, I don't want to be a pastor. I didn't feel a call to preach, so I didn't. So I was very confused. Like, to me, I was like, seminary is for pastors, so why am I going? But I went forward anyway. And I believe that God gives us just enough light for each step that we take, right? God doesn't, I guess for our good, does not give us the full blueprint, right? Because if we saw it, we would be scared and we will run the other way, like Jonah. But God gives us enough light for each step so that we can, see God's provision and providence in each step that we take. And so, if you don't know your purpose, my advice is for you to pray, and that God will reveal that, to ask friends that truly know you, friends and family that truly know you, to see about the gifts and the skills that they see in you. That can also help us point us in the direction of our purpose. And then if you do know your purpose, I say, start going after it, start going after it.
All right.
Your gifts really will make room for you. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're okay.
So we're at the part of the interview where you get to plug stuff. So
Okay.
there's you're still trying to get people to buy the book and listen to the podcast, how people can get in touch with you. This is your time.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, thank you so much for having me, Eric. Yeah, I got a lot of things going on. You can always follow me on social media at Sister Theology, SistaTheology, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. And then you can follow my podcast at Truth Table on all of those social media platforms as well. Our new season is starting, our season 8 is starting on March 23rd, 2024. And of course, you can buy our book, Truth Table, Black Women's Musings on Life, Love, and Liberation, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Award. You can buy that book wherever it's sold. You can go on Bookshop, you can go on Amazon, you can go wherever you buy books, you will find the Truth Table book. So, and also check out Truth Table's newest nonprofit, our not our newest, it is our only nonprofit, Truth Table Foundation, where we equip and strengthen Black Christian women to go out into the world and do the amazing, purposeful things they have been called to do. So that's at truthtablefoundation.org. You can donate. Black nonprofits always need donations and support. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, Sister Ekemini Uwan, pardon me for the right there. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for what you're doing. I know it's not easy, but you talked about Dr. Edmondson and other folks that you affiliate with have pressed on, and I encourage you personally to press on because we need you. And so, I thank you for what you're doing. And again, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. And we are back. And so now, my next guest, Glenn Rushing, has over 30 years of experience working in both government and politics at various levels. Before joining PDG, he served for 10 years as the Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. He was also previously a partner at the Liaison Group. I hope I'm saying that right. LLC consulting group based in Arlington, Virginia. His multifaceted career portfolio also includes roles as the Southern Deputy Political Director for the 2008 Hillary for President campaign, Deputy Political Director for the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, or the DSCC, and as the National Field Director for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC. Prior to his work at the DCCC, he was Chief of Staff to former Congressman Ronnie Shiles of Mississippi. Glenn worked on his first campaign in 1987 as a regional field coordinator for Mississippi Governor and former Secretary of the Navy Ray Mabus. Since then, he has worked on over 20 campaigns, serving as manager, field director, and field coordinator for a variety of candidates, including President Clinton's 1992 and 96 elections. Glenn remained front and center in the nation's most pressing policy debates, navigating complex congressional caucus politics, and deploying strategies that capitalize on bringing Capitol Hill and the White House to the table to build a diverse coalition of support for clients. Throughout his career, Glenn has engaged in challenging policy matters including international and foreign affairs, immigration, healthcare, agriculture, rural development, and transportation and infrastructure. In addition to his campaign experiences, Glenn has worked for the governor's office in Mississippi as an executive assistant for executive services and administrative assistant for constituent services. the United States Department of Agriculture as a confidential assistant for congressional relations, the City of Jackson as Director of Governmental Affairs, the Hinds County Board of Supervisors as Director of Human Capital Development, and served as District Director and Chief of Staff for Congressman Ronnie Shows. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest and also to have as a friend on this podcast, Glenn Rushing. All right, Glenn Rushing. How you doing, my friend? You doing good?
Brother, doing well. I'm even better now that I can talk to you in person.
I hear you, man. It's been a long time, and I.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, and I tell people the story how I got you in trouble when I was running for the U.S. Senate the first time, and I was out there, and you were lobbying for me at the DSCC, trying to make sure I got my money or whatever support, and they sent you off to Ohio.
I forgot you're right. I was sent off to Ohio.
They sent you Ohio. Sherrod Brown was going to beat the crap out of whoever he was running. Was it DeWine he was running against? It was like Sherrod had that election won, and
it was DeWine.
Yeah.
It was DeWine. I'm pretty sure it was DeWine.
Yeah, Sherrod was beating the crap out of. They sent you over there just to give you something to do instead of bugging them about me. But I greatly appreciate you, man, and not only for that, but for what you've been doing. And so I just kind of wanted people, to the audience to kind of hear the concept, here's somebody that has been behind the scenes. A lot of people pay attention to the folks that get elected. But not too many people know who the staff people are. And you've been one of those folks who have been, you did your time in Mississippi and you got to Washington and you've worked for a number of congressmen and congresswomen. And now you're in the game as far as lobbying is concerned. So I wanted people to get your perspective on that. So I just kind of wanted to highlight you, so people will know how that aspect of the political system works. But what I like to do at the beginning of every interview is to start off with a quote. So it's either something that you might have said, something you might have written, or something that relates to the work. So your quote is this: I think there's no higher calling in terms of a career than public service, which is a chance to make a difference in people's lives and improve the world. What does that quote mean to you?
Service. I mean, I've been in public service since I left Jackson State University. As a matter of fact, it was Dr. Allie Mack who got me started, actually. I don't know if you know this story, Eric. I was walking across campus one day and I dropped into the political science department. And Dr. Mack asked me, did I want to introduce Governor Ray Mabus? Well, then there was state auditor Ray Mabus running for governor on campus. So I said, sure. So I went to the dormitory and wrote me a little introduction. And long story short, fast forward, I ended up on his campaign. I've always been interested in public service because I saw, icons like Congressman Benny Thompson and Louis Armstrong. Those guys they were doing the thing. They were on TV all the time, and I was in Carthage, Mississippi, and I'm seeing these guys on TV all the time. I was like, man, that's fascinating, and they're making things happen. They're changing things. So that was, and I had family members that were involved in public service. But it became a part of my DNA. And, you don't ever know where you're going to land in this life as you progress. We political science majors, we all have the intention of going to law school and got sidetracked with politics. And here I am today, been in public service for a long time on the staffing side of it. I had a desire to run for office one time, but I figured out that, you can actually serve in staffing roles too, and be just as effective, because, the politician, they can't do any more than what the quality of their staff. If they have a good staff, they're going to have good public policy, and if they don't have a good staff, they'll just be just not as effective, I'll say. So it's been a long journey, been a fast journey, it seems, but it's that quote to me means, service is a higher calling. It's almost like a spiritual calling, one that allows you to give back outside of the church through public service. So that's what it means to me.
Yeah. So you touched on the next question about what was your motivation. So I'll move on to this one. You worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years. What is the most glaring difference you see now as compared to when you worked there?
Wow. I'll go back when I first got to Washington in 92, but 93, actually working Capitol Hill. I was in the Clinton administration. And there was still civility, Eric. People still talked across the aisle, and people were still, as we were saying, probably still willing and dealing and cutting deals and helping each other. Fast forward to 1995, all of that changed, and it happened right before our eyes, and you could see it so clearly. Newt Gingrich changed Washington, and it was the beginning of what we see today. And it's sad that what we see today makes Newt Gingrich look like he was a moderate. But that was the beginning of what we saw today, because the level of civility started to degrade and became really more polarized in the way people operated and communicated with each other. You go on the House floor right now, you're not going to see Democrats who are on the left side of the aisle facing the speaker. You're not going to see Democrats walking to the Republican side and having a real policy conversation. It just doesn't happen. You may have a couple of blue dogs and some other members who are more pragmatic that will go over there and talk, and likewise Republicans will come to Democratic side. So it's all very, very just hardcore disabled politics, I'll call it. And it's to a point where you can't get anything done. I had one person to tell me that the worst thing, it may have been as a result of, it was either, I think it was Stennis. Senator Stennis said the worst thing that happened in Washington was television cameras. Once you put those cameras on the floor and put those cameras in the committee rooms, it became Hollywood. Everybody's speaking to their constituents, and you lost that real dialogue to come up with good policy. So that's where we are, and it's sad. Can we get back to where we were? I think it will take a third party to shake up the whole system before we get back to the civility that's needed to run this country in the most efficient and proper way.
Yeah. So, well, you talked about Stennis, and that was the main thing why the Senate was didn't get on the C-SPAN right away, because he was over the Rules Committee, so he wasn't going to allow them to come on like what you saw in the House. And he basically said you're going to have 100 people running for president if you put C-SPAN in there, and he was right. But you said that Gingrich was kind of the start of it. My thing is, you know, when you were up there, and I would come up and visit and stuff, and you know, it was like you being a legislative director. That was the most important job for a member of Congress. You were the one that kind of helped make sure that their policy agendas, whatever bills they really wanted to work on, you and people like your peers were the ones that kind of helped make that happen. Now it seems like the most important job up there is the communications director. As a matter of fact, I don't know if it was Derek Johnson or somebody that had actually showed like a job description for communications director for one person in Congress, and it was like 2 or 3 pages long, and then the legislative director was like 1 paragraph for that same congressperson.
Yeah.
So do you following up on that, do you think that it's been really a more of a commitment to showboat and get likes on social media that's driving a lot of these people now, and also creating the wedge that you see up there on Capitol Hill?
I think you have some of both, Eric. You got members up there that it seems like that's all they do is showboat, and they do invest a lot of time into tweeting and Instagram and TikTok, which maybe. But I don't know if it's going to be going out the door, but they're trying to get it out the door.
You're right.
But they use all the social media platforms for some of these members is what they thrive on. Getz from Florida would be one of those. It's theatrics. It's about the 6 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news. But then you do have members that still are serious legislators, and the legislative director and the chief counsels are still very important. Now, mind you, just like you all had in the state legislature, I mean that the people who really legislative directors give them direction, but the people who really are drawing it up is the office that actually writes the legislation. It's the office of counsel's office. They're writing the legislation. You just tweak it and kind of tell them what you want, but. No, I think you are correct. There's a lot more showboating going on, and you look at legislation now. There's they have very very few pieces. There are about 10,000 pieces of legislation introduced every year, and it's probably around about 2 or 3% of those that actually see daylight. So it's not an easy process to get your stuff in, but it's even more difficult in the type environment where it's not about policy. It's about got you game and who won today. So I wouldn't say that it's all showboating. That there are some very serious legislators that are still working hard to serve their constituents and to help our country.
So how hard does that make it for you now that you're in the lobbying end of it?
Here's the hard part now. Turnover is much greater. And that's even with staff too. But members of Congress, the turnover is greater. So, as a lobbyist, your bread and butter is based on relationships, and so as those change, you got to constantly get new relationships and learn new people, new members of Congress, new chiefs of staff, new legislative directors, new committee staff. Now, committee staff typically do stick around a little longer because they're in the back rooms, and they typically a little older. But it's still a process here that you still got to go through. So I don't know how well it can be changed to make it better, but it's a constant revolving door, which means you got to go to the receptions. You got to show up at fundraisers. You got to show up at birthday parties. Any kind of event where you can be seen, be able to press the flesh, so we can have some little sidebar talks.
Yeah. So, I lobbied for a little bit in Mississippi, and I definitely relate to that because, the colleagues that I served with that were still there, of course, we had relationships and all that. Didn't matter what side of the aisle we're on. But, learning the new faces and trying to figure out, what their likes were and all that kind of stuff. Having those sidebar conversations, like you said. So I can only imagine. I mean, in Mississippi, you're only dealing with 170 some folks. In the House alone, in D.C., you got 435 individuals, and
and most of them don't. And most of them don't know each other.
Exactly.
They don't. That's not.
Yeah, most people in America don't know them except the people that elected them in their particular district. The ones that we always see on TV. That's one thing, but it's like, there's a bunch of individuals out there, and then you've got some places like America Samoa and the Virgin Islands that have delegates, and very few people know them. You know what I'm saying? So,
Well, I'll say this: if it was not for staff in Washington, it would be a complete collapse, because staff, committee staff, and personal staff, those are the people who are doing negotiations on the early stages of developing a bill. They're the ones who are determining. The member may tell them, I would like to see a bill with X, Y, and Z in it, and then the rest of it, the staff they're putting all of the wheels on the car and making sure that the bill is something that both sides can live with, hopefully. But typically when it happens, there's always, it's got to go through the markup process, committee process, and you're going to have members that want to amend stuff and all that. So it makes it a lot more difficult. But if first had to start to create bills from day one and write the bills themselves and negotiate it from the beginning, it would be a complete collapse. You wouldn't get anything done in Washington. So staff play a very, very vital and critical role in making things happen in Washington, because they're the ones the members are relying on to do the real negotiations before it comes out to committee and before it gets on the floor.
So the staff, people that work in the staff get along better than the actual elected officials, I take it, based on what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will say this about members, and I've been on some co-dales with members with Republicans or even hearings that are out of Washington. When those members are on the bus, that's when you have real conversations, Republicans and Democrats. Then you get the truth, Eric.
Yeah.
You get the truth there. But when those cameras come on, the truth doesn't mean anything. But you'll get some really you'll get Republicans talking about Trump, and they'll be like, gosh, I don't you can see the frustration. But the next time you see them on television, the president was right. The president was right.
Oh yeah, I remember the games well. It wasn't as bad in the state legislature as I can imagine it at the national level. But yeah, we had to in public kind of watch our words as compared to when we were in the cloakroom or in the back of the back of the chamber, talking about whoever the governor was at that particular point. So what has been your favorite moment in your career dealing with politics? What either gave you pride or just what was your favorite moment so far in politics?
Had a lot of different moments, great moments. I mean, I think working for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, when she introduced the George Floyd Law Enforcement Reform Act, and of course that ended up being something else. The name changed, and seeing that go through, she put a lot of time into that. Well, I think just working for her though. It was, I mean, I've been in politics for a long time before I started working for her. I thought I knew everything, Eric, but she runs the office like it's a campaign office. I mean, it's constantly moving. I was in the office until 12 and 1 in the morning every night for 10 years. I'm trying to think of it just one, because there were so many moments with her. I'm trying to remember one in particular one just maybe stands out. The George Floyd one was probably the biggest one because that took a lot. It took a lot of negotiations to finally get something across the finish line, even though we didn't get. It ended up going to the Senate. The bill was pretty much watered down. We didn't get a lot of the stuff that we wanted in there. So I think that would be one of the proudest moments because it was something that had been talked about for a long time, and nobody wanted to take action on it. Can't think of anything else that just stands out that I would say the proudest moment. I loved working on reparations. I didn't understand reparations until I started working on it. She took the issue over from Congressman Conyers, and we were able to get it a first hearing in Congress. And this is the reparations bill to create a commission to study reparations and its impact on African Americans. So, I mean, those were some of my proud moments. I think it's hard to just pivot to just one and say that was just the proudest because there was so many with her. Then with Rodney Shiles, we had the TRICARE bill. We were working to get TRICARE, and we eventually got something across. TRICARE was not taking care of soldiers and their families. We got that across the finish line eventually. So those were some proud moments. Didn't get across the finish line while he was there, but that bill eventually, his bill actually ended up passing. It was after he left, but he's the one who put it on the table and got it going and got it at least into the public sphere.
Is he still up there lobbying now?
He still comes up. He and a friend of his from Louisiana. He comes up and they still have some clients and still lobbying. Yep. Yeah. As a matter of fact, their office is in the old Methodist building right across next to the Supreme Court, across from the Capitol.
Yeah, it was like working on his campaign was a cool moment because I was county chair at that time, and we had to do some maneuvering where we ended up being the organization to get his money. And so, because the party was in disarray, and Martin Frost had sent his campaign manager down. Yeah, that was some pretty wild times, man. But I was so glad for him because he was one of the good guys, and not that he's gone on the other side, but he was one of the good guys down there in Mississippi to work for. So. You know, it was pretty cool to see him get elected. So, you know, what advice would you give young African Americans who want to seek a career in politics?
Get involved. Wherever you are, get involved. Don't be shy about asking questions and, you know, reaching out to people. I used to tell interns all the time. I had a great uncle that tell me, said, he said, I know, son, people have told you it's not what you know, it's who you know. And he said, but that's not true. It's not who you know, it's who remembers you. And I took that with me because I've met a lot of people in my life, and I don't necessarily think they know me anymore because I didn't keep up with them. The only people that I still have relationships with are the ones that I kept a connection with. And so it's really critical that as a young person, when you meet people, especially people who are in places of power or influential people or in community leaders, wherever they may be, business owners, when you leave them, get the card, follow back up with them, and keep in contact. If you think that's one that's going to be worthy of helping you down the road, stay in contact. You'll be surprised. First of all, it's impressive that you did it. You stayed in contact, and is even more impressive that you just followed up in general. So always make that first impression the best impression. I guess the other thing would be, I would tell folks, go ahead and, I will say, complete your education. If you want to go to law school, go ahead and go to law school.
Amen to that.
I took another route because I got caught up in politics and couldn't leave.
Me too.
And it wasn't it's not a bad deal. Just the way life took me. And I'm not saying don't just follow the, where the path takes you. But if you really want to go to law school or go to graduate school, just go ahead and do it. Because politics is always going to be here. But once you get into life, things kind of take over, and you won't have those same opportunities. So I think those are the two biggest. But main thing, just get involved. Because I know when you and I were coming along, I mean, there was a lot of us involved in the process, and you can't find it now. It's even hard to find. It's hard to find kids to even do field work when it comes to campaigns, or you're not going to find an African American fundraiser hardly. It's just they're not out there. There's a huge need for more involvement on the public service side and campaigns for young African Americans. The other thing I would say is this: if you get an opportunity, get involved with a campaign. You can do it while you're in college. Just get involved in somebody's campaign. You'll get lifelong friends, and those friends create a circle. And in politics, Eric knows this. In politics, it's just one big family, and once you're in that family, everybody it's a cycling door. It's just a rotating door. I've been blessed because I've been in campaigns, and that these friendships they never go away. And don't go get into a presidential campaign. It's not hard to do. There were young kids when I was in Bill Clinton's campaign from all over the country. Some of them came in to volunteer first and ended up getting jobs in the campaign. Others came and just took some low-paying jobs, and then they moved up in the campaign during the process. But more so than that, it's the people you're going to meet in those campaigns that they're going to remember you, especially if you impress them, but they're going to remember you. And then when they go to other places, other venues, they're going to say, hey, remember Glenn, remember Eric? You may want to call them and see if they want to work. And so that's the way mine's happened. From one campaign to working in a government position, in another campaign, working in a government position, it just never stopped. And it didn't stop because of relationships. Relationships that I developed over the years. So that would be my biggest, biggest message to young people is just get involved wherever it is, if it's local, state, or federal.
Yeah, and I've interviewing people that are kind of legendary now in politics. They started in college. And that's one thing I always tried to stress in the interview is like, so when you were in college, what motivated you to do what you did? And, like you said, Ray Mabus, I don't know if he'll get the flowers that he deserves. But Ray Mabus opened the door for a lot of us in the black community in politics. I mean, you got discovered introducing them.
Yeah, you're right.
They came after me at the Young Democrats when we were organizing Young Democrats on campus. Pickett Wilson, right. That crew, Laura Hammonds, all those folks came after me that. And then it's like people I served with, like John Horn and then Gary Anderson. Mabus brought all those folks in. Mabus brought all those folks in. And so.
Willie Simmons?
Yeah. So like I said, man, most people on the national level know him as the Secretary of the Navy twice and being a former governor of the state of Mississippi. But that campaign, when he ran for governor, really opened the door for a lot of us to get our foot in the door, and to get involved politically. Like you said, sidetracked us from going to law school, right? And got us going. So, what Brother Glenn is telling y'all young folks, man, y'all pay attention to that because it's true. And the one thing I didn't mention, I was the student body president my senior year at Jackson State, but Glenn was my class president. He was the senior class president. So, when if I refer to Glenn, Mr. President, how you doing? That's why, because he was the one that we voted for in our class to lead us. So, well,
I tell you what, the listeners need to know that Eric Fleming broke up a mafia who had already determined who's going to be elected every year, somebody president for years, and he came and broke it all up and won, and started his own administration and had his own team.
Well, I don't know if I broke up anything, but it was like if you were a member of Phi Beta Sigma on campus, you pretty much were a lock to be student body president. And I was not a member of Phi Beta Sigma.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, you actually educated me. I had heard. I knew about that. You were the person that you weren't on the slate, and you took them out.
Yeah.
I didn't know it had the connection with the Phi Beta Sigma.
Yeah, that was the deal. They had the position, for last. Well, I think Jerome was an alpha. Jerome was the alpha, but then it was like the Sigmas had kind of gotten in, and so that was part of the deal. But my biggest allies was the football team. When I ran for,
I remember that.
When I ran for SGA justice, I went to the football dorm, and it takes Frank Sutton and other folks to tell the story better than me, but it was just like I caught them totally by surprise. They had never had anybody running for SGA come to the football dorm and say, "Hey, man, I need you to vote for me." And so it was like at first it was kind of a joke to them, and then Frank and a few other guys said, "Hey, y'all, he came to talk to us. Let's hear what he got to say." So, from that point on, I guess that's when I started breaking the mafia up, because I had the football players on my side.
No, I will say this, because when you did that, it changed. Everybody started campaigning that way because everybody started focusing on football, the sororities and fraternities. So you changed the way to campaign on campus.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, brother. But to break it down to what we're dealing with now, that's way I think we have to go. We got to get back to that. We got to get back to, and you don't have to pander to folks. You just got to show up. Just using the football example, what could I say to the football players that are, as an SGA justice or a student body president for them? You know what I'm saying? They ran the Jackson State football team. They were the outside of anybody else, they were the most important students on campus. But, it's all about showing up and being there. And I think that's something that we've totally lost, because one of the things, watching, it hadn't gotten that bad when I was lobbying Mississippi, but now I think it has. But in other states, it was happening where if you were a lobbyist and the Republicans were in charge, you didn't even talk to any Democrats. You didn't have dinners with them and all that stuff. I just can't even imagine that. Because when I was in there in the legislature, it was like, hey, we're taking the committee to dinner. So that meant Democrats, Republicans, independents, dogs, cats, whatever, the wives, everybody could come. And I just can't even imagine this world now where we just picking one side over the other and not even talking to the other side to try to convince them to vote for legislation. But that's only at the state level. I know y'all not doing that at the national level, but at the state level, that's kind of been a trend. And and we got to get back to politics the way that it used to be, where we could sit down and disagree, but still and not be disagreeable, But look, man, We can go down that memory lane thing for a long time. How can people get in touch with you? How can people get in touch with you? And
we'll turn this into a family reunion.
That's right. And reach out to you if they want some more advice, or how if they want to hire your firm. How can people get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me at the PeterDamonGroup. We are a strategic public and governmental affairs business development. We do event management. We do a lot of the CBC events. We actually do the African American Mayors Conference. We do their events. But they can reach me at 202-225. I'm gonna give you my congressional number. 202-271-5340. 202-271-5340. And we are a boutique firm that give our clients a personal touch. We're not one of these big law firms that you see them when you come to town. We service our clients as if they are, and that's how we operate. We use our years of relationships in both the executive branch and the legislative branch to make things happen.
Well, and shout out one of your people you work with, Denise Terry. I know she's a go-getter.
Yeah.
And
I was with her last night, matter of fact.
Okay, yeah. Well, next time you see her, tell her Eric still, he still thinks about her, even though I'm not in Mississippi no more. I tell her I'm proud of what she's doing and how she's been moving forward. All right, Glenn. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
I'm gonna do better keeping it. At least we keep in touch on social media, but I'm gonna do better keeping in touch with you, brother. Because
we'll do.
I'm really, really proud of you, and how you've ascended in this game. It's not an easy thing for black men to do. And you become one of the old heads now, brother. You've become one of the masters. So keep up the good work, man.
Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate all you've done and been an example for me as well through the years. And we started on the same stomping grounds, and you've always meant a lot, and you've always been someone that I could look up to as well to sort of lead the path, because you've always been active, and that was something that gave me an opportunity to sort of pattern myself after. So I appreciate you as well.
Well, thank you, sir. All right, guys, we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And now it is time for my final guest, Dr. Na Dove. Dr. Dove is a proud mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She has lived in Ghana, Nigeria, Canada, the U.S., and the U.K. She graduated with a MSc from the Institute of Education in Sociology with a focus on racism and the miseducation of the black child. She graduated, so I guess that's a specialist master's. She graduated with a PhD from the State University of New York in Buffalo with a focus on African culture, women, and education, and has written articles, chapters, and encyclopedic entries, and 3 books. African Mothers, Bearers of the Culture, Maker of Social Change in 1998, the Afrocentric School, a blueprint in 2021, and co-authored Being Human Being, Transforming the Race Discourse, also in 2021, with Dr. Molefe Kete Asante. Her accomplishments include her involvement in developing African-centered and Afrocentric schools. Dr. Na Dove is a tenure-track assistant professor of Afroecology at Temple University with a focus on African culture, African women, particularly mothers, and Afrological episteme. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Dr. Na Dove. All right, Dr. Na Dove. How you doing, ma'am? You doing good?
I'm doing fine. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm honored to have you, and a mutual friend of ours, A.O. Sakai, wanted to make sure that I had you on the podcast, and I'm glad that you accepted my invitation to be on the podcast.
Thank you.
What I like to do is start with a quote from either the person I'm interviewing, whether they wrote it or said it, or it's a quote that relates to the work that they're doing. So your quote is this: many contemporary Black scholars have continued to address this same question of educating the African American child. The inescapable reality is, and has always been, that the liberation of African Americans is dependent upon an effective education. We emphasize effective because so much of our education has been virtually useless in accomplishing the objective of liberation. The process of miseducation, as described by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1931, has continued to impede our progress as an educated people. Dr. Woodson's conclusion that the majority of educated Blacks were all but, quote unquote, worthless in the uplift of their people remains an issue of deadly accuracy. His analysis was that the seat of the trouble was in what African Americans were being taught. What does that quote mean to you?
Well, Carter G. Woodson is an inspirational person for anyone that is studying education and what is happening to the minds of African people in this country. He's basically describing cultural domination of the conquerors of Europeans, and that Europeans, as the dominant cultural group, are creating the inability of African people to know who they are. What happened? What happened before African people were captured and enslaved? What is the past? What were the cultural beliefs and values of African people? So enslavement is of the mind as well as the body. And when it is of the mind, it is also of the spirit and the soul, because the mind is connected to the spirit and the soul. So African people are being prevented from knowing who they are. And the liberation of the mind is to actually know who you are. So it's a way that the schooling process, as Dr. Mwalimu Shuja would call it, he would say this is not education, it's schooling. Schooling is to adjust to the cultural orientation of the conquerors and learn the skills that are necessary to maintain that cultural and social organization. And education is about learning who you are, learning why you are here, and what are your options while you are here, what is your mission, these types of things. So really, Carter G. Woodson is correct. The liberation of our minds is based on the knowledge of who we are, and we are being taught who we are not.
So, and I guess that kind of answers my next question. But you've had the privilege of living in different places around the world. What makes African Americans unique in the African diaspora?
It's because when African people were brought here and enslaved here, many fought for human rights, and it has been a process in this country, and many have died in that struggle to change the circumstances that people were brought here and forced into being who they were not. And in that process of making change, certain rights have enabled African people to really seek, within the Pan-European Academy, for instance, to seek knowledge about the ancient past. And there are two things here. One is that when African people were brought here as enslaved people, cultural beliefs and values, many of them were still maintained. People just didn't lose them just because they couldn't use their agency to be free. They kept them quiet, and that was a way of maintaining a semblance of humanity and being able to live through these terrible times. And so it is still with African people who were brought here. But then there are people who have been privileged enough to get into the academy and use the academy, which is also maintaining the cultural orientation of this society, but have been able to use and exploit the academy to study who African people were before they became enslaved and forced to be what the dominant culture wants them to be. And so it's like being in the mind of the oppressor. And sometimes that has revealed knowledge about behaviors, about ideas, about the construction of race, what it took to maintain a false belief in race, and to create an environment where people would see themselves in a hierarchy of humanity, either superior or inferior based on the amount of melanin in the skin. So this is one of the greatest falsehoods that we live in. And when we go to the ancient past, we can find that African people did not practice racism. Racism was unknown. So we can actually date it in the chronology of the history of humanity. So this falsehood has created a Black person who has been constructed by race as a cultural belief system. And so if that makes sense, I hope it does make sense.
Yeah. Everything that you say makes sense, Dr. Dove. I just want you to understand that. And that perfectly answered my question, which leads to my next question. What is the objective of your book, The Afrocentric School, A Blueprint?
Okay, well, I've worked with Afrocentric schools, although they weren't called that. This is a more recent terminology. But when I was in the UK, I was in the supplementary school movement because I was a parent. And I knew, having grown up for a while in the UK, that what they were teaching us was not true. And I wanted to be able to, along with the whole movement that was going on there, supplementary schools were Saturday schools and maybe one evening in the week where children were taught their African history. And so I was lucky enough to be part of that movement. And my friends and I, we started a Saturday school, and we were part of a Black parent group. And all our children went to the Saturday school, and we would have meetings, in terms of education and what we're going to do, because many of the Black children in the UK were being, sent out of school and were having all kinds of problems. The school was giving them problems. It was not the children at all. So the supplementary school was a way of giving them extra knowledge so that they could actually go into the state schools and navigate their way through, knowing that this is a system of oppression and how to handle it. And many of the children going through didn't have that background, so it was quite difficult. They fell into all the ways of undermining their integrity and downgrading them and creating things called behavior problems and special schools. So the Saturday schools were able to teach the children what they faced. And then when I came to the US to do when I did my first degree, I did a study of the schools, how many there were, the students. I interviewed parents and students and so on, and I started a book on African mothers who send their children to these schools. But I developed it when I came to the US because in the US, there were full-time schools, full-time African-centered schools. And, I gravitated towards that movement. It began in the 60s, 70s here in the States. And the Council of Independent Black Institutions was the biggest umbrella organization of the schools across countrywide. So I was privileged enough to be able to participate in that organization and visit the schools and meet the people and the parents. And so that became part of the work that I was growing to understand. And later I was able to go to Ghana and work for UNICEF, but I betrayed UNICEF because I went there with an Afrocentric perspective, and all that I had learned from my own African background and what I'd learned from Africa was that the institutions, the cultural institutions that maintain the ability for African people to hand on their knowledge culturally were being destroyed, and European institutions were replacing them. And I was blessed enough to meet my line manager, who wanted me to do a study, to be the leading consultant in a study. And he allowed me to take it from the Afrocentric perspective, which was to look at actually respect what was going on in child upbringing practices, and look at things like how the children learned about medicine, how they learned about the different plants and the different ways that you could heal people, just ordinary children, and then how some families had the major skills, and how some children were chosen through the shrines, through dreams, through their behaviors, to be medical practitioners in the African way. And things like that, breastfeeding, recognizing that there was an attempt to stop breastfeeding, looking at how children learn to farm in the small rural areas, small farming communities, and how they understood the ecosystems, and they understood many of the ancient traditions that they still held on to. And I learned those things, and that was in the final report, which was not acceptable because it supported the people and not the plans to dominate. But I used the findings from that. The children from even before born knew things, and the parents knew they knew things. And so I was able to ask the parents, mainly mothers, what are your children doing at these particular ages? And there were probably about 1,200 responses, and there were, maybe about 35 viewers and so on in different parts in the different regions in Ghana. So it was quite a big work, a big study, baseline study. And from that is the foundation of the book. So although the majority of these children were not literate, they had so many skills that you would wish your own children had in this country. So I never put it in a hierarchical way, because what's the point of being literate when you're learning rubbish that is telling you that you're nothing? It's better to not be literate, but to know about your environment and how to respect your elders, love your ancestors, and so on and so forth. So I've put it in there, the expectations of the ages, and I've made it have the syllabus that would suit the skills of mainly all children, but taken from the African children.
Yeah, so one of the things I noticed, it was like, for example, at a very early age, you were teaching children what KMT meant, or commit, and the significance of that. And then as they got older, for example, like say when they were like 11 and 12, then you got into colonization and how that came about. So it's pretty spelled out how you incorporate, as we like to say, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but then you put in all these different other elements that we would normally not get in a public school, and you spread it out, which I think is brilliant. But that leads me to this question. Many scholars like you have proposed an Afrocentric curriculum for our children. And based on your answer, it sounds like 50, 60 years ago, we kind of were pretty organized in that. Why do you think that the idea has not spread throughout our community like private schools spread throughout Southern white communities after the Brown versus Board of Education decision? And not that, you're more educated than me, so you understand the question, but for the listeners, what I'm really saying is, when that Brown decision came, white folks in the South moved, and they started building academies. There's one academy in Mississippi right now that I can tell you is nothing more than perma-steel buildings. But they built that, and that school has been in existence for generations, just so that those white kids would not have to go to school with those black kids. And I guess, the essence of the question is, how come we weren't that motivated to do the same thing and create these schools to teach an Afrocentric curriculum?
Well, I think in many ways the African communities, the African American communities did have their own schools and were teaching the children African ways, even though sticking to the ability to achieve the credentials to be able to have the skills to work anywhere. There was always that the values and beliefs and the behaviors that were expected, they're African oriented. And so I think that was taking place. So there were things, financial constraints, but they were not as important as being able to teach the skills with respect and love of the children. But I think once the desegregation took place, that was a very thrilling moment to say, well, there are all these opportunities out there. We should have access to everything out there, and it was like opening the gates. And I think that one didn't foresee that in going into it, one was going into a cultural orientation that was anti-African and anti-Black, even more so, in more subtle ways. I mean, there was the obvious and the segregation to maintain a way where people didn't mix. And in some ways, it was a preferred situation, as I say, because some of the values and beliefs were still maintained in the communities. But once it opens, our minds became more Europeanized. And, all those aggressions and ideas of individuality, take what you want when you want it from whomever, those type of things became more, we took them in and became more sort of Europeanized ourselves. When we look at the idea of colorism, for instance, it is just racism. That's all it is. But we've taken the European and Arabic determination of race, which isn't real, and we have now ascribed, looked at ourselves with the same eye, and some of us have believed that if you're lighter skin, you're superior, and if you're darker skin, you're inferior. And we do it to ourselves. There doesn't have to be any Europeans anywhere in sight, because the culture is within us, and we're transferring it to our, to our descendants, the same things that we're being taught. And that is what school is teaching us. That is what the media is teaching us, because culture is so powerful that the dominant group, that all institutions will reflect the values and beliefs of the cultural group. And we're in a dominant culture. And so everything from media to medicine to schooling to economics to spirituality or religion, they're all shaped by the culture that they rise in. And so, we have a few things to do. The more we understand who we are, the more we understand that our African ancestors were the civilizing people of the world, were the teachers of the world, the more that we begin to understand that, then we can tweak the institutions that we have to work in, like Dr. Asante has tweaked Temple University, so that there's an enclave within a European structure that creates the Pan-European Academy, whereby you learn how to, all the European people, all the famous people, the philosophers, the mathematicians, all of those people. He's created an enclave where we learn about all the African philosophers and mathematicians and so on, by developing a theory, Afrocentric theory, within. He's developed that. So there are all these ways that that African Americans have been tweaking the current institutions to make them more bearable, to make African people safer in them. But at the same time, there has to be a sort of vision about really what we want, so it's working in two ways. So I think that's really what many African American people are doing, because if you see or look at the history, the chronology of uprisings and changes, the seeking of democracy in this country, which doesn't understand democracy at all. It's an African thing, democracy. This is not. But I believe through Afrocentric theory that this cultural orientation, that we maintain some of the vestiges of it, and you can learn more with knowledge, and that that has been within the African movement to make social change, and that social change has benefited everybody. But people don't recognize that it's African people who are actually doing this. And, and because of the race paradigm, when we look at it, we say, oh, it's a black thing. Those black people are doing this thing because they need this thing. But that's really not what's going on. Black people are fighting for human rights for all people, but they're doing it alone as if it's a black thing just to fight for black people. And that's not what's actually happened when you look at the history of this country, from the murdering and genocide of the original people, the bringing in the captured, enslaved Africans, and how it has slowly been changing. And there's so much more to do. And people are not satisfied because in their minds, they recognize that it can be much better because that was the past. That already existed. So people know culturally that they can make it. They have a different set of standards about what is good. And we call that ma'at. We call that the first moral system that came out of Africa, that was practiced Africa-wide even before ancient Egypt and Kemet. And it's a set of principles that guides people, that they can remember and that we should know about. Even if we can't remember, if we're taught that, then the memory comes back and it feels right. And the thing is that everybody's African, really, but it's the race paradigm stops people from seeing the equality of human beings, stops people from recognizing their ancestors, because the modern religions don't want us to know our ancestors, because when we thank them for our achievements, we're remembering a history, because history, if you believe in ancestors, then all the way up until now, the ancestors that preceded us were those that have been with us throughout time. And it's only the good people who could be ancestors in the African way. Ancestors are not just people who lived before that you're descended from. They are the good people that you want to remember forever. And there are Africans who just live to become ancestors. They just want to fulfill the requirements of becoming ancestors. So I hope that makes, sort of sense there.
Yes, ma'am. All right. So real quick, I really got a couple more questions, and I don't know if we can get them in, but a liberator once said that education is the passport to the future because tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. A slaveholder once said that if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Why do you think in today's political climate that education as a whole is being devalued?
Well, because people don't really understand what education is, but it is being used in the academy to maintain control of people's knowledge. So we're being taught European knowledge as if that is the most important knowledge that we should have. And the academies, even in Africa and around the world, are Eurocentric, so that we're always learning about the greatness and the genius of Europeans under white supremacy as white people in the race paradigm. And so when that is happening, it prevents people from acknowledging that there may be other ways of thinking, acting, believing, other orientations, other knowledge. The truth is that all this knowledge has been learnt from, everything goes back to Africa. All of it has been learnt from Africa, but it has been taken and put inside the race paradigm to believe that white people are the epitome of humanity. And really, they're a branch of African people who've lost their melanin and gotten a strange idea that it's very valuable to be white and try to maintain white. If they marry into other people, it's considered to be genocide inside the white supremacist belief system, which comes out of the European cultural orientation. So white supremacy is a part of that, and it's a doctrine. And we're being taught this doctrine that white people are the most superior people on earth. But if we look at chronology of humanity, the movement of humans chronologically, that we find that they are people who have taken knowledge from other people, taken their lands, taken their wealth, and imposed ideas of these people's inferiority across the world and implanted their own institutions to maintain the belief in their superiority. But really, it's just about violence and aggression. That's how they took it. And it's very limited even for white people who believe in white supremacy. It's it's really in opposition to ideas of that there is an ethical and moral order and a way that one should actually act in order for everybody to progress and be the best that they can be. It's antithetical to that, because it's saying you can't be anything but what I've told you you are. And I am the superior person. I hold the knowledge. But what does that knowledge mean? When it's a false knowledge. It's a falsehood. We're believing in something that's utterly untrue. And you can actually see chronologically its construct, how it came about.
How would you encourage African American parents to take ownership of their children's education?
It is very, very difficult, because people, people are suspicious. We can all be black, but we can be very suspicious of black people. That's what we've been trained to do. So we actually don't trust that we can do what's necessary. So people, it's just the cultural orientation. It's in people's minds. We've been trained to see ourselves through the European eye and the Arab eye, and we're inferior. The darker we are, the more inferior. So it almost becomes like a sort of strange people who think strange things about education. Would I trust my children with those people, even though they're the same color? But would I trust them? If I send my child to Harvard or school, any of the European schools, my child will progress and do well. That's the belief, but that really isn't true. But it just depends what our standard of doing well is. What do we want? So I wrote my first book, and today I'm going to Brazil to interview African mothers in Brazil who want to send their children to an Afrocentric school. And my first book was based on mothers who send their children to Afrocentric schools. It's called African Mothers, Bearers of Culture, Makers of Social Change. And it is about my reason for it was, why would these mothers, out of all the mothers, want their children to know they're African? So I interviewed them about their lives and their stories. And the book is based on these mothers' stories, so that an ordinary, not ordinary, we're all extraordinary, but a mother could open up the book and see a mother in the book just like herself, who would convince her that it is a good idea for my child to learn these things. These are the accomplishments of these children, being loved and cared for and learning the skills that they should know in a good environment. And that's what the book is about, but it's contextualized by the history of being captured and enslaved and all the movements of women who helped to change those circumstances. And I tried to put those mothers in the same movement, people who want to make social change because they see beyond what we're being taught to see. So, as I say, I'm going to Brazil today after our interview to interview young mothers. I'm 78, but they have this book and they got in touch with me about the book, and I put them in touch with numbers of the schools that still operate, because there are still schools in this country that are still exist, and there should be more of them. And so we shall see, but understand we're in an anti-African environment, and it's in our minds too.
So how can people just like those sisters in Brazil get a hold of that book? And how can people get in touch with you if they want to have you come and talk about Afrocentric curriculums and so on?
Well, the book, your friend, our friend, she's my daughter, actually, my daughter, not of my blood, but of my mind's daughter, Ayo Sakai. She's the one who published the book, because she's publishing books that wouldn't be published by the pan-European publishers. And but you can actually get it on Amazon. It isn't a cheap book. It's not cheap because Ayo Sakai is an independent Black woman publisher, and it costs a lot more money to be able to publish the books that go against the trend. Something like $55. But it is a book that holds a lot of information for parents regarding their children. And it's not rigid. You know how you get the years in books, and if your child's not doing certain things in certain years, it's you feel like there's something wrong with your child. This book is not like that. It starts with wherever your child is, and you teach your child. It's done in the years, but you can, see what your child knows and use the book for any ages. So if you have a child who's, 6 years old but thinking like a 12-year-old, that's perfect. You can go and use stuff that 12-year-olds know, the skills they've developed. So you can, and because it's a blueprint, it's already got the syllabus there, but you can build upon it. So it isn't just that. That's to give you the examples that you can use that actually work, but you can add to it as much as you want because it gives you the inspiration to think about ways that you would like and information you want your children to have. So it's in Amazon. Io Sakai published it. And I'll give you my email at Temple. So if anyone's interested in talking to me, I'm happy to discuss it with people. And it's nard.dove@temple.edu.
Well, Dr. Dove, first of all, safe travels. And second of all, thank you for what you're doing. What you have been doing all these years. It has been not only an honor to talk to you and pick your brain, but to just know that you're out there doing that work. So I thank you for that. I have a soft spot for sisters that have British accents. So I greatly appreciate talking to you. And I'm just thankful that you came on the podcast, and hopefully that the parents that are listening will invest in that book. As somebody that went through college, $55 is cheap compared to the textbooks that we had to buy when we were in school. So I think it's a long-term investment in your children. So thank you again for taking the time and coming on the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure and absolute honor, and thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. All right, guys, and we're going to catch y'all on the other side.
Okay, bye.
Bye, Doc. All right, and we are back. So let me apologize a little bit, guys. I know the audio may not have been perfect, but I hope that you got everything out of those interviews. I don't know what's going on. As you know, I do an independent podcast. Excuse me, this is not a major studio or major network, anything like that. It's just me. And so I do my best as far as not only getting quality guests and putting the show on, but also trying to edit and work with the sound quality and all that. So I don't know what's happening with my connection. It's something I'm just going to have to work on for a while. I'm in a different location than where I had been, so that might be part of the reason. But nonetheless, I hope that you got the gist of those interviews. And I'm just going to continue to do better. But I want to thank Ekemini and Glenn and Dr. Dove for coming on and working through with me as we were trying to get everything set up and get these interviews to you. Like I said, Glenn and Ekemini I've been trying to get on for over a year. And, yeah. So I greatly appreciate y'all's patience. And I want y'all to keep listening and keep supporting the podcast and keep telling folks about it. And we'll get through it. We'll get through it because it's too important now not to have this voice out there. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, until next time.